Welcome to the Motivation Without the Hype podcast with your host, Gez Perez. He's an author, high-performance coach, and motivational speaker. This show brings you inspiring messages and interviews to unleash your greatness in life and in business. So let's get started.
Everyone, welcome to Motivation Without the Hype podcast show. My name is Gez Perez, a former procrastinator. Into an action taker, we bring you inspirational messages and interviews, including motivational insights, tips, principles, and proven strategies that you can take action on without the hype in unleashing your greatness in life and in business. Now, we appreciate you plugging in and spending time with us. And we have a very special guest, a fellow Aussie, and I'm really pumped. I'm super grateful to have him on the show. His name is Simon. He is a husband, a father of two, from Queensland, Sunshine Coast. We're not far from each other. He's also a social worker with a private therapy practice dedicated to supporting men to open up about mental illness and disability. He's passionate about men's mental health because he has also experienced mental illness, OCD, depression, anxiety, burnout over 30 years. And it took him 20 years to finally get help that he needed. And now he's an overcomer. Simon, welcome to the podcast show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and hello from up the Bruce Highway.
Yes, here we go. Really grateful to have you on. So, Simon, please tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I think you pretty much captured it. So I'm a husband, I'm a dad of two. I've got a 2.5-year-old and a 5.5-year-old. I'm a social worker and I've recently started up my own social work business. So it's the Mindful Men Therapy business. And it's dedicated to men because I've lived with mental illness for over 30 years now. So, and it's only been 10 years ago that I first went into a doctor's office and said, I think I've got mental health issues. And so I've been on a recovery journey for the last 10 years. But for the 20 years prior to that, it was a lot of bottling things up. It was a lot of self-discovery, a lot of self-medication with drinking and stuff like that, and just trying to figure out what's going on. But yeah, 10 years ago, I finally did that, and it's been a good journey.
So were there any triggers for you to, because it's real serious to go through that journey. What was the trigger for you to say, you know what, it's time for a change? Did you go through certain situations, or as well, you just made that conscious decision, say, you know what, I'm making that change? Where was that period of time?
Well, it was with my now wife, and I probably wasn't showing up in a relationship like I would have liked to, and hurting the relationship. And we're living down in Hobart at the time in Tassie, and I went into a bit of a depression and was really, really introverting. I was not so outcoming and out forth, and she said, Simon, you've got to go and get some help for whatever's going on because it's hurting our relationship. You're not the guy that that I started dating, you're drinking a lot as well. And I think by that stage, I'd kind of been thinking about going and getting help for the year or two prior, but what had held me back was this fear of, and I guess stigma associated with medication. I didn't really want to be a guy that goes onto medication and have to have meds every day. But eventually got to a point where I just had to do something. I knew I had to do something internally and in the heart, and so, yeah, I did that, made that phone call, booked the appointment, and off I went. So it was really just a combination, I think, of growing up a bit and going, okay, yep, what my partner was, she's my wife now, but what my partner was telling me was true, and I needed to go get help.
How did you open up to get some, to really open up? Because, not many males, they want to fight through it, and we'll discuss a bit later on these questions. But I'm really just interested, like, how did you really, came to a point where you actually listened? And, because sometimes humility may not be a big take for a lot of men, but coming to that humility state, it says, okay, I'm going to listen, and I'm going to get some help. How did you, go into that state? Because it's really challenging for a lot of men.
To get to that point, like I think I'd been doing it for so long and I was just exhausted. The things that I was trying to do, like, drinking wasn't helping, and I thought like most guys can just go for a run or join like a boot camp thing and exercise will solve everything, and that was making me feel better, but it was only short little Band-Aid fixes. And so I think it just got to a point where I couldn't do it alone anymore. I needed answers. I needed outside help because obviously my partner, Rachel, she's not a therapist. And so I couldn't keep using her as this sounding board. And I was probably at a stage where I matured a little bit, you know. This is 10 years ago, so it's like in my late 20s. I matured to a point where I recognize that, okay, what's going on isn't right and I need help. And so I think it was a bit of a combination of those things.
Did it require a lot of deep work in terms of self-discovery? Did it have to go to that stage where, all right, this is the challenge that you have, more than meets the eye. We can't just deal with the leaves. We need to deal with the root. So again, how did you go through and really dealing with the roots to get your your breakthrough in your life?
Yeah, I think it's a journey. So the first few times I went to therapy, the first time I went to therapy, I got the diagnosis, and then it goes, okay, this is what it is. I knew I had depression, to a lesser degree, anxiety. I didn't know I had obsessive compulsive disorder. I didn't even know what that was. And so, you know, I go, okay, I've got this thing called OCD, and OCD is the big driver in my life. And I think it was more, I did a bit of research at that point, but then I did spend the next, few years still doing the same old things. Even though I was going to counselling, I was still drinking and still trying to just fix it with exercise. Dropped in and out of therapy because it felt like homework. But at least I had this diagnosis that I could understand. I could put a name to what was happening inside, and it wasn't really until my mid-30s and I started my social work degree, and I started this capacity to really critically reflect about life, and that coincided with me becoming a dad as well, and start thinking about bigger things other than me. And then it's only really been the last 2 years specifically that I've at a point where I can start projecting this out to the world and going, okay, this is me, this is what's going on inside. And it's actually through Instagram, when I set up my Instagram account as a part of my burnout recovery in 2020, that I got introduced to an OCD community. So all these people on Instagram that have OCD and they were talking about OCD. I'm like, I've never heard of this before. I've never experienced this before. So through the beauty of social media, I was like, oh, wow, there's a huge network of people who have OCD. And they introduced me to what's called exposure response prevention, which is an OCD specific treatment. And I trialed that last year up here on the coast, and it really had some great results. So it's not until these points in my older years, like in the last couple of years, that I've really been able to do the deeper work and go, okay, this is what's going on. This is how I can work through it. And then this is also how I can educate other people on what OCD is particularly.
That's amazing, because you're going through a journey and there's a lot of intention. So, in the beginning it was like, oh, it's okay, I'm aware of it, but it's still, you're living life. However, once you go through the route of, okay, let's get serious, I want to learn, and you become more aware and like, oh my goodness, all right, I need to deal with this, need to deal with that. So now going through your personal journey, what really inspired you to help other men, of our generation about mental health? What kind of said, you know what, I'm getting good strides, I want to help other people, right?
Yeah.
What came to that point?
Yeah, so I think, with my burnout journey, so
Yeah.
in 2020, I burnt out. I was working full-time in my 9-to-5 job. I was studying, so I'd started my Masters of Social Work, so I was doing that in the evenings and on the weekends, and really investing a lot of energy into that outside of the 9-to-5. And we also had 2 kids as well during my studies, and COVID lockdowns and all the stuff that happened with COVID. And it got to a point where I just physically and mentally just burnt out. I was just spent. And I ended up taking 4 months off of work. And I just couldn't, I was like just laying on the couch every day. And even then that was a struggle. Like I was just in this massive funk, and it was just terrible. And so I started projecting this out to the world through my Instagram account. I started off like a daily affirmations thing, just trying to inspire myself, and then other people started coming along for the ride, and then I started talking a bit more about OCD and depression and anxiety and men's mental health as well, And when I got back to work 4 months later, I did a presentation at work that talked about burnout, because burnout's a real big thing where I used to work. And I just put in more authenticity about myself and said I had burnout, but I also live with these other mental illnesses as well. And that started a lot of different discussions around that. But then I also been reflecting, the social worker in me starts thinking about, okay, what's these big influences in life that influenced me as a person in both the micro and the macro levels. And I remember growing up, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in northern suburbs of Adelaide. And so the northern suburbs of Adelaide are working class, the manufacturing. They used to have the Holden's plant there when they used to manufacture Holden's cars, and cold chisels from there. And we had the Snowtown murders were influenced there, if you remember those. And there's lots of pockets of welfare as well, like low socioeconomic and mixed with the lower middle class. And so in the 80s and 90s, in a world before social media and phones and internet, I was influenced by the guys around me, and I had 3 brothers and dad in the house, so a very masculine household. We played Aussie rules footy. I played basketball. We did athletics, so very sporty. And so our idols were sports people, and particularly in those days in the Aussie rules, like there was no thing like the blood rule. So you'd see guys running around on an oval with blood all over them, in their faces and stuff. And so we started to learn, okay, this is what it means to be an Aussie rules footballer, because we love footy. And then, thinking about that time, we had our heroes on TV were Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rambo, Bruce Willis in Die Hard and all this type of stuff. These are really tough masculine guys. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we learned in the 80s and 90s, and I talked to a lot of guys from those years, who grew up in those years, and it was this mantra to be a man was to suck it up and to be tough and bite the bullet, don't talk about your emotions and stuff like that. And so this really honed in on what it meant to me to be a man. And so for the next 20 years, I didn't talk about OCD, and I developed OCD when I was 8. And, I was in the schoolyard, and for anyone who's listening who doesn't understand what OCD is, I better just quickly define it. So obsessive compulsive disorder it starts with an obsessive thought. It's like an intrusive thought, but you can't get it out of your head. So, for example, my entry into OCD was a student in the schoolyard in primary school said to me, Simon, if you don't talk for more than a minute, you're going to lose your voice forever. So this petrified me. I'm like, wow, that cannot happen to me. I need to keep my voice. And so from there, obsessive compulsive disorder turns into a compulsive act or a compulsion or a behavior. So you do something in order to alleviate the distress caused by the obsessive thought. And so I hummed to myself. I started humming because I thought, okay, if I can't talk because I'm in class or whatever, or around other people, I can do this small little minute hum, like a like really quietly. I did that for about 2 years. And the reason you do the compulsive act is, to bring down the anxiety and the anxiousness that comes with the obsessive thought. And so that was my entry into OCD. I didn't know what OCD was back then, didn't even know what mental health was back then. And then for the next 20 years, it evolved into a whole bunch of dark places and scary things, a lot to do with safety and security. I'd spend a lot of time in my teenage years checking doors and were locked, windows were closed, had this overwhelming fear that someone was going to break into our house when we were sleeping and kill us or steal our stuff or whatever. Or the house was going to burn down. So I spent a lot of time checking that ovens were off and stoves were off. And I'm talking about 2 hours a night as a 13-year-old or so. And so that was happening, but I didn't know how to talk about it, didn't know what was going on. And so I bottled up for 20 years. And then, 10 years ago, I finally bit that bullet and go, you know what? The things that I'd been doing for so long, I don't necessarily believe that guys need to suck it up. And so I need the help. And it was hard. It was hard going to that GP's office and saying, I think I have a mental health issue. But the more and more I talk about it, to the point now where I've got my own podcast talking about it,
That's epic.
It does get easier. So I want to be that, often, and in this space, I talk to a lot of guys who are doing similar work. I say, why do you do what you do? And they all say the same thing. It's like, I want to be the guy that I never had growing up. and I needed to talk to about this type of stuff. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I'm projecting it out to the world to hopefully inspire other guys, not necessarily just with OCD, but depression, anxiety, relationship issues, identity issues, business issues. I've started a business, so I'm projecting that out to the world and seeing what's going on, and just to inspire them to talk and be mindful of who they are, whether or not that's with a friend, a family, a doctor, a therapist, or whatever. Just start talking and opening up.
That's awesome. And I think where you're projecting, I think a lot of men go through, it may not be the same situation, but could be the same similar scenarios. How can men open up about mental health, particularly with challenges that they go through, and bottling it up, 80s and 90s, or could be multi-generational as well? What would be a practical steps that they can actually start overcoming it?
Yeah, I think it always starts within. Like, you've got to recognize that something needs to change, and if you need inspiration, I love the Tony Robbins quote. It's change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. So it comes to a self-reflective, kind of like that moment for me 10 years ago where I'm like, okay, yeah, I've got to go talk to someone. And it's the same, like, you need to recognize that you need to do something different. Like, nothing changes if nothing changes.
That's right, yeah.
And so start there and just to start reflecting inwards. Go, okay, what's going on? I'm not feeling great. Do I agree to this whole thing that guys don't need to talk and can't talk and all that? And if you say no, and I hope you do, like, just start there and then go, okay, start with someone that you trust. And it could be a family member or a friend, someone who you respect and they respect you, and you know that they're not just going to fob you off. Because a lot of guys will go, hey, how you going? You go, yeah, okay, and that's it.
That's it, yeah, exactly right.
Or even if you said, oh, I'm not going too well, they're like, oh, well, suck it up.
Yeah.
You don't want to talk to that guy.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm all right, but not really.
Yeah, you want to find someone who goes, okay.
Yeah.
And then from there, that person, you don't necessarily want them to fix you as well. You just want them to hear you and just listen to you and hold space, kind of like what you're doing to me right now. You're just sitting there listening. And so, start there. And if you don't have one of those people, your GP, find a doctor, a GP, because they're impartial. They're objective as well. They don't know your life like really intimately unless you go see them like we do every week because the kids are always sick. And talk to them. And a GP is a great spot because they'll do some initial assessments. They'll do some initial questionnaires, and all it is questionnaires. Like you tick them. You go, okay, how are you feeling today? Bad, good, whatever. And then that prompts a referral. And so in Australia, we're really lucky here. We've got the mental health care plans or mental health treatment plans, or whatever they're called these days, where you can get subsidised psychology, counselling, social work, whoever you want to see. And then you can go to a psych and counsellor and whatever, and you can start the healing process. You could start talking to someone who's trained in this type of stuff. Someone like me, I've got my mental health business now. Not only am I trained in listening and hearing your thoughts and giving you some tools and strategies, but I've walked in the shoes for 30 years. Yeah. So,
and that's important.
And it is important, but that's probably the critical point, is that even if you find a psych that you like, a counselor, therapist, whoever it is, because there's lots of different options as well. Mental health occupational therapist, another one that comes to mind, is that you need to find a right fit. And I often say to people, ring around to a few different places, like a few different service providers, or look up on their website. If you've got OCD, you want to find someone who knows OCD or is interested in OCD or experienced in OCD. You don't want to go to someone who has no idea about OCD. And OCD is a hard one because not many people do work in this space. Or if you're experiencing depression, you don't want you're experiencing male depression, a female can give you a good balanced approach as well, but also it can be good to talk to a guy as well. So it's just about finding what works for you, what makes you feel comfortable. And also, like, if you get into therapy and it's not working, you're not gelling with the person, it's okay to change. Just find a different person, find somebody else, because you can change your mental health care plans to somebody else. Like, it's easy. And so, yeah, that's the starting point. Start talking, find someone you trust, And then when you're ready for therapy or whatever, and people go, I don't want to do therapy. And there's different ways. Like it could be as simple as checking your diet, checking are you drinking too much, checking what are the stresses in your life, are you getting enough vitamin D, mindfulness practice. I do mindfulness-based practice in my therapy. So if you're interested in that type of stuff, but there's a whole range of different types of therapies. I was talking to a guy yesterday who did Reiki, and I've never even heard of Reiki, and he's telling me about Reiki. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like it's different, and it's not traditional therapy. So there's lots of different options. It's just got to find what works, and that's why I say I'm on a journey. Because 10 years ago, my therapy looked very different to my therapy does today.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So can I just ask, and these are all really insightful steps, because it's really important to have that self-reflection and then getting some help, going to humility to say, hey, I do need help, even if it's just a conversation, may not be therapy at that stage, but just reaching out. And I think that's really important. So those who are listening and watching this podcast show, and you have, certain situations, we've got all the provided links there on the show notes. They can actually reach out to Simon. He's doing all wonderful and amazing thing that he's doing to helping others finding their breakthrough as well. Can I just ask as well, whether it's in career or businesses, you talked about burnout. I think that's really important to highlight that. But the most common challenges that people face, particularly with men, is stresses. Now, they have different ways of dealing with stress, but it also leads to burnout. What are the things that they can do to manage stress and move forward? Because I know I get a lot of coaching sessions, and first thing, I'm just stressed out. We go through that journey. But from your take and your perspective around your area, how do you manage stress and how do you move forward, particularly with men?
Yeah, so stress, I think it's probably important to reflect on that. Stress is a normal part of life. Like, we have stress in our life, and it's just a normal reaction. It's not something to shy away from. Where the issue comes in is when you have stress after stress after stress, and you don't relieve it in a healthy way. So if you're relieving your stress by getting on the booze every night after work, that's not a healthy way to deal with stress. Take it for someone who's done it,
Yeah,
and so the real issue is are you leading towards burnout? And burnout is prolonged chronic stress where you haven't relieved it in a healthy way. It's kind of like you're holding multiple candles and you're burning all of them at both ends. You're up late, you're drinking, or, you're not really giving you any self-care to you. You're not doing exercise, you're eating bad, And what happens with burnout particularly is stress, you can kind of get over that and it comes down again pretty quickly. But burnout just keeps going up and up and up until you become a volcano, essentially. And you lose the things like joy, you get angry, you get irritable, you lose passion in your work particularly. So for me, I lost like the drive. I started becoming really cynical as well and thinking that everybody else is the issue, not me, and vice versa, and finding no way out. And it got to a point where where I had to take 4 months off of work just to recover to a point, and then I had to have a graduated return back to work because I couldn't really just step straight back into it. So it's about managing every aspect in your life, like like the basics: sleeping. Are you sleeping? Are you going to bed and sitting on your phone? And an easy tool for that is, when you come home, and if you're a family man particularly, is put your phone down for the night. Turn it off.
Yeah, that's right.
If you need to have it on, just put it on silent and let it vibrate or whatever. And maybe just check it once before you go to bed, or if something like drastic's happening at work or whatever. But often it's where are you not doing your self-care? Is it an easy way that you can check into yourself? Are you exercising, sleep, eat, all that type of stuff? Because if you can manage that, then you can kind of manage the stress. But it's also at work. Like, I worked in a high KPI environment where, you do one bit of work, press approve, the next one's straight there. And that's tiring. And you've got to start having these conversations at work as well, and saying, look, I can't just keep being this conveyor belt of work. Like, I need a break. I mean, COVID accelerated that because we're all working from home, or not everybody, but I was fortunate enough to work from home. And so we're doing that. We had the kids home from childcare at the time, and we're trying to parent, and two of us are trying to work, and it was just mayhem. And so when you can't switch off because you're in those types of environments, like that's another thing that will just lead to stress, lead to burnout as well. So now that we're coming out of COVID, it's getting outside again. It's, it's using your 5 senses, get out in the garden, mow your lawns. Guys love mowing their lawn. I love mowing my lawn.
You love your lawns?
I'm not into lawn porn, but I do like the smell of cutting my cutting the grass.
Fresh cut grass, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
and I was feeling,
yeah, I've done it. Yeah, that's it.
yeah, I was feeling stressed recently because I hadn't been able to get out to my backyard to mow the lawn for a couple of weeks, and it was looking terrible.
Yeah.
But then
That's
I
good
cut it.
perspective. Yeah, I like that.
I went out and cut it, and it's like cleaning your house. Like if
Yeah.
you live in a messy house, you feel like just sluggish.
100%. You got,
But if you
and
go
it
and
just clears
clean
your mind
house,
as well. Yeah, it's just like
Yeah.
you go in it. If it's messy, you clean it, and then it just clears your mind. Like, man, I go in, you're in a clean slate. That's awesome.
Yeah, for other guys, it's washing their cars and stuff like that. Like you just do that type of stuff, and social isolation is another huge thing. If you don't have a release with like-minded people, it can be hard. So it's finding, can you go and start socializing again? Can you meet up with your mates instead of at the pub? Maybe can you meet up with them at the beach and go for a walk, or just do something active? And these are the pretty simple things. But again, if you can't do it by yourself,
Reach out.
to your GP. Yeah.
Thanks, Simon. I always ask this question to every guest that's on the show. What is your meaning of motivation without the hype, and how to use motivation for your personal success?
Yeah, so motivation without the hype, I was reflecting on this last night, and I think it's that inwards moment, that inwards reflection moment.
Yeah, I love that.
When you go, I need a change. Because there's no hype around it. There's no one coming to save you. There's
Come
no
on.
white knight going to knock on your door and say, let's go.
That's it.
It's you recognizing that you've got to change and do something, and then doing something with it. They're the two key things. And then how do I use it? It's what we're doing right now. Like I'm at a point now where I've talked about mental illness for so long, or so often, that it's a normal thing for me now. Like it's normal as talking about my physical health. And so I use this as a motivator. Like it gets me up at 5:45 in the morning to talk to you on the podcast.
Appreciate it.
And I would have never have done that in my old career, because it never lit me up. But this lights me up, and yeah. So that's how I'm using this to motivate and do Mindful Men at the therapy business.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Simon. We, on behalf of all the men out there listening, we appreciate you, even the insights, the experiences. And guys, for more information, how you can get in touch with Simon, please reach out to him, connect with him as well. And all the links, whether it's website, social media, even this podcast show, please support it. Give it a thumbs up. Put a 5-star review. Everything helps as well, just for that support. And having that awareness and taking action will save your life, and actually you will experience your breakthrough as well. So, Simon, thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you on the show, guys. Please be sure to connect with him and follow him right now. So if this episode has been helpful and uplifting, we would love for you to write a review to inspire more listeners to get plugged in. We will continue to provide high value content in each and every episode. Now, if you don't mind sharing this podcast show on social media by inviting others, it would mean the world to me. Every time you tag me or tag us, we will get the opportunity to share those posts, and together we can make a difference in the lives of others through inspirational messages just like this. So there you have it. In closing, continue to unleash your greatness and tell yourself that I can, I will, and I must, and we'll see you on the next episode.